The University of Washington campus in Seattle in the early 1970s was a landscape of progress. The Vietnam War had begun to wane. The civil rights movement had ignited a generation of activism, and a cultural revolution was unfolding among the youth. The air hummed with rebellion, hope, and independence. It was a time of transformation, especially for young women. They were stepping into futures their mothers had barely dreamed of. Enrolling in law school, studying psychology, living on their own, wearing jeans instead of skirts, choosing their own paths. The Pacific Northwest had become a beacon for forward-thinking students, especially in liberal cities like Seattle, Olympia, and Eugene. College campuses swelled with ambition and energy. Women walked freely across green quads and modern buildings, clutching textbooks and dreams. But behind all that promise, something was watching. He moved through these spaces like a shadow, a phantom in plain sight, charming, helpful, soft-spoken, the kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy. But back then, everyone just called him Ted. To those who knew him, he was intelligent, clean-cut, and maybe a bit intense, but nothing alarming. A psychology major at the University of Washington, a volunteer at a suicide crisis hotline. He answered phones beside future true crime author Ann Rule, who would later say, "I liked him immediately. He was kind, considerate. I would have trusted him with my life." And that's the thing. People did trust him. They didn't see what lurked behind those smiling eyes. Bundy didn't just walk among the students. He thrived among them. He worked on Republican campaigns, brushed shoulders with local politicians, and even attended law lectures with aspirations of one day holding office. On paper, he looked like the future. But his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. In reality, Ted Bundy was already slipping into darkness. The first official disappearance came on January 31st, 1974. Linda Ann Healy. She was 21, majoring in psychology, and worked part-time writing radio broadcasts for a weather service. She lived in a shared house just north of campus in Seattle. One morning, her roommates noticed something strange. Linda's alarm had gone off, but she never came out of her basement bedroom. Her bike and purse were still there. So were her clothes for the day. But Linda was gone. When someone finally checked her room, they found the bed made oddly, almost too neatly, except for a large blood stain soaking through the sheets and pillow. A blouse and pants were missing from her closet. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Except something violent had clearly happened. The shock rippled through the university. Posters went up. Friends held vigils. Police took statements, but they had no leads. Linda's disappearance remained a mystery. And then it happened again. March 12, 1974. Donna Gail Manson, 19, disappeared while walking from her dorm at Evergreen State College in Olympia to attend a jazz concert. She never made it. Her friends assumed she'd gotten a ride or changed plans. But when she didn't return the next day, or the day after, alarm bells started ringing. By April, it was Susan Elaine Rancourt, a freshman at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. She told friends she was going to an evening movie screening on campus. She never showed up. Then came May. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22, left her dorm at Oregon State University to get coffee and clear her head before an upcoming exam. She walked across campus and disappeared. Brenda Carol Ball, 22, vanished after leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, Washington, near Seattle. She'd been seen chatting with a man at the bar. He had his arm in a sling. A pattern began to take shape, but back then, there was no central database connecting police departments across states. These were considered isolated incidents. The dots hadn't yet been connected, but the commonalities were impossible to ignore. All were young, all were women, all were intelligent, outgoing, and attractive, and all had long, dark hair parted in the middle. The community started to panic. Dorm rooms that had once been left unlocked were now bolted shut. Women refused to walk anywhere alone. Fear settled over the region like fog. Still, no one had seen the predator coming, not clearly, until the summer. Sunday, July 14th, 1974. Lake Sammamish State Park, just east of Seattle. It was a hot, brilliant day, one of the first truly summery weekends of the season. Families picnicked under trees, children splashed in the lake, students laid out towels and tanned under the sun. And weaving through this crowd of thousands was a man. He looked normal. His arm was in a sling. He carried himself with quiet confidence. He approached several women that day. He said his name was Ted, told them he needed help loading a sailboat onto his tan Volkswagen Bug nearby. Some agreed. Others declined. One woman grew suspicious and backed away after following him to the parking lot and seeing no sailboat in sight. Another remembered the sling. Another his calm, polite tone. But two women didn't come back. Janice Ott was 23, a probation caseworker, sharp, friendly, grounded. She was seen talking with the man, then walking with him. Later that day, just 4 hours later, 19-year-old Denise Naslund vanished too. Two women, in broad daylight, from a packed public park. It was unprecedented. Witnesses pieced it together. The sling, the sailboat story. The name, Ted. One woman recalled, he didn't seem threatening. He just needed help. I remember thinking how polite he was. This was the mistake Bundy made, his first real slip. For the first time, people had a consistent description. A name, a face, a car. Police released a composite sketch. It resembled dozens of young men. But the name, Ted, and the detail of the tan Volkswagen stood out. Calls flooded in. One of them came from Elizabeth Kopfer, Ted Bundy's longtime girlfriend. She had grown suspicious over time. Odd behavior, items she couldn't explain. But every time she started to worry, Bundy would say the right thing to pull her back. Even then, authorities didn't act. There just wasn't enough. Meanwhile, Bundy refined his technique. His ability to lure women had evolved into a chilling routine. He would feign injury, an arm in a sling, a leg in a cast, even the use of crutches. He'd drop books or fumble with keys. He'd strike up a conversation near a library, a coffee shop, a bookstore. And when a kind-hearted woman offered to help, he'd lead her toward his car. Always the Volkswagen Bug. Once there, he'd grab a crowbar, a tire iron, something hidden, and strike. And that's when everything changed. Bundy had realized something horrifying. The more he looked like someone who needed help, the safer he became. His appearance, his weaponized normalcy, became his camouflage. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like the kind of man your mother would approve of. That's what made him so lethal. Bundy's victims never had a chance to fight back, not because they were weak, but because they had trusted their instincts. They were doing what kind people do, helping someone who appeared injured and alone. And that trust, that humanity, was what Bundy exploited most of all. By the end of that summer, law enforcement knew they were facing something terrifying. A serial killer who wasn't hiding in the shadows, but one who had figured out how to wear a mask of complete normalcy. And he wasn't going to stop. Bundy never looked like a killer. That was the most terrifying part. He didn't snarl. He didn't creep. He didn't wear a mask or hide in the shadows. Instead, he smiled. He made eye contact. He was clean-shaven, soft-spoken, and confident. He had the kind of face that made people relax, not recoil. And he knew exactly how to use that to his advantage. Bundy wasn't just a monster. He was a master of illusion. He looked like someone's older brother, their neighbor, their friend's charming boyfriend. His appearance was his disguise. His manner was his trap. And for a long time, it worked flawlessly. It wasn't just that he could charm strangers. It was that people trusted him immediately. And that trust, it was his deadliest weapon. After the disappearances in Washington and Oregon, Bundy could feel the walls closing in. The sketch released after Lake Sammamish had caught attention. His tan Volkswagen had been reported. His name was on more than one list. So in August 1974, he made a move. Salt Lake City, Utah. A new city, a new school, a new hunting ground. Bundy enrolled in the law program at the University of Utah. It was the perfect cover. A respected program, full of serious-minded students. Bundy slipped into the role easily. He attended lectures, chatted with classmates, and even went on dates. But the mask was just that, a mask. Within weeks of arriving in Utah, he was back to stalking women. This time in unfamiliar territory, but using the same tactics. The first known Utah victim was Nancy Wilcox. She was 18, a high school cheerleader from Holiday, a suburb of Salt Lake. On October 2, 1974, she left her home to run a quick errand. She never came back. Then came Melissa Smith, 17 years old, the daughter of the Midvale police chief, a sweet, well-spoken child who had just been through unfamiliar territory. However, once something happened in Utah, Bundy decided to take aim for people he knew another time and see what happened to him. So in August 1974, he waited until his status was already up for grabs. From 2006, he backed to stalking women. This time in unfamiliar territory, but using the same tactics. The first known Utah victim was Nancy Wilcox. She was 18, a high school cheerleader from Holiday, a suburb of Salt Lake. On October 2, 1974, she left her home to run a quick errand. She never came back. Then came Melissa Smith, 17 years old, the daughter of the Midvale police chief, a sweet and nice guy. Sometimes, not just a well-spoken boyfriend. She had been with his older brother, their neighbor. A sweet, well-spoken child, who had just been a quiet girl who'd gone out for the night and vanished without a trace. Her body would be found 9 days later. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. 2 weeks later, Laura Aim disappeared from Lehi, Utah. She was 17. Her remains were discovered weeks later near a riverbank. Like the others, violence and silence. And then, January 12, 1975, Karen Campbell, a 23-year-old nurse on a ski vacation in Snowmass, Colorado. She had just stepped out of her hotel room to grab a magazine. That was all. She was never seen alive again. Her body was later discovered in a snowbank, nude, battered, and discarded like garbage. A routine walk down a hallway had ended in murder. Her skull was fractured. Her autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head and signs of sexual assault. The spread of these crimes, Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, left police departments scrambling. Every jurisdiction thought they were dealing with an isolated killer, a one-off madman, a local tragedy. No one realized they were all chasing the same ghost. Bundy's ability to move across state lines, carefully, deliberately, made him almost invisible to investigators. He was one step ahead at all times, exploiting the fractured nature of law enforcement in the pre-digital age. There were no centralized databases, no coordinated task force, no DNA matches. Bundy understood this. He was educated, well-read, and coldly analytical, and he used his knowledge to outsmart the system. While detectives in Seattle puzzled over college girls vanishing in the rain, officers in Salt Lake City were looking for answers in the desert. Nobody was connecting the dots. But Bundy wasn't perfect, and as his confidence grew, so did his mistakes. On the night of August 16, 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer named Bob Hayward noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle cruising through a residential neighborhood around 3 a.m. Hayward knew the area well. The car looked out of place. He followed it, flipped on his lights, and pulled the driver over. It was Ted Bundy. Hayward asked for ID. Bundy handed it over, calm and smiling. But something didn't feel right. Hayward looked inside the vehicle and found a ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, rope, a flashlight, an ice pick. Bundy claimed he had been out driving and just got lost. But none of it made sense. Why did a law student need burglary tools in the middle of the night? Bundy was arrested on suspicion of possession of burglary tools. It seemed like a small charge, something that might have been brushed off. But behind the scenes, wheels were turning. When investigators dug into Bundy's background, they noticed something unsettling. The name Ted, the tan VW Beetle, the soft-spoken voice, the polite manner. And then they remembered the Lake Sammamish State Park sketch. Bundy matched it. Slowly, methodically, the case against him began to build. His name had already been phoned in after the Washington killings, by his girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, and even a college professor. But without hard evidence, nothing had stuck. Now finally, the threads were coming together. But the turning point, that came when a young woman named Carol Durant stepped forward. Carol had a story, one that had haunted her since November 8, 1974. She'd been shopping at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah, when a man approached her. He said he was a police officer, told her car had been broken into, and they needed her help down at the station. He was calm, respectful, carried a badge. She got into his car, tan VW Beetle. They never went to the police station. Halfway down the road, she realized something was wrong. The man pulled over suddenly and tried to handcuff her. But he made a mistake. He only got one cuff on her wrist. She fought, she kicked, she screamed. Somehow, miraculously, she got away. A passing driver picked her up and brought her to the police. She lived. And now, standing face to face with Bundy in a police lineup, she pointed at him without hesitation. "That's him," she said. The dam had broken. Bundy was charged with attempted kidnapping. But behind that charge, detectives knew this was the guy they'd been looking for. The predator who had haunted Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. And they were just getting started. As they traced Bundy's steps, more pieces came together. Witnesses placed him at Lake Sammamish. Forensic matches began linking him to scenes. But more chillingly, a psychological profile began to emerge. The man they were dealing with was not just violent. He was cunning. He was methodical. He was deeply disturbed. And his backstory, it only deepened the darkness. Bundy had grown up in a household built on a lie. Born in Burlington, Vermont in 1946, he had been raised to believe his grandparents were his parents, and that his mother was his older sister. That deception, discovered later in his adolescence, had fractured something inside him. He struggled with identity, with anger, with inadequacy. In his own words, Bundy described himself as feeling like he didn't belong, that everyone else had something he lacked, that he was empty inside. But he was good at pretending, at performing. He became a chameleon, and that ability to fake normalcy would later allow him to kill without suspicion. His long-term girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, knew the facade better than anyone. They had met in Seattle years earlier. She was a single mother, recently divorced. He was charming, ambitious, attentive. To her, he seemed like a catch. They lived together for years. But behind closed doors, strange things kept happening. She once found a stack of women's underwear in a drawer. Another time, she discovered a box of surgical gloves and plaster. There were nights he disappeared with no explanation. Days he came home dazed or short-tempered. Elizabeth didn't want to believe the worst. But something deep inside her screamed that something was very wrong. She eventually called the police, twice, gave them his name, his car description, even mentioned his behavior matched that of the suspect at Lake Sammamish. But both times, police dismissed her tips. He didn't fit the profile. He was a law student. He volunteered at a suicide hotline. He was clean-cut and white-collar. He was too normal. Now, with the evidence finally piling up, those missed warnings echoed louder than ever. Bundy's ability to live a double life, to compartmentalize his savagery and his charm, made him all the more terrifying. And Elizabeth, once blinded by love, now realized she had spent years sleeping beside a killer. In the end, it wasn't just a confession that brought Bundy down. It was persistence. It was one officer's suspicion during a traffic stop. It was one woman's brave escape. It was a girlfriend's unwillingness to look away. The man who had once walked freely across college campuses, who had driven unnoticed across states, was finally caught in the web. But even behind bars, Bundy wasn't done. Not yet.
He had more tricks to play, more lies to tell, and more lives to unravel. And the most twisted part? He still believed he could talk his way out. The courtroom would soon become his stage, and the world would be watching. The courtroom was a theater, and Ted Bundy was its star. By the time his trial began in 1979, the name Ted Bundy had become a national fixation. The charming, clean-cut former law student, the man with a pleasant smile and polite demeanor, was now on trial for a string of murders so horrific they shattered America's sense of safety. But if anyone expected him to cower behind attorneys and quietly face justice, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. Bundy wasn't just the accused, he was the performer. He made the shocking decision to represent himself. It was unprecedented. A man accused of murdering dozens of women choosing to act as his own lawyer. But Bundy craved control. He wanted to speak, to be seen, to manipulate the room the way he had always manipulated everyone around him. And it worked. He cross-examined witnesses with calculated precision. He made legal arguments with the poise of a seasoned attorney. At times, he even seemed charming. Reporters noted how he smiled for the cameras, relished the attention, and thrived under the spotlight. The trial was televised across the nation, and Bundy became the first serial killer turned media sensation. But the horror hadn't stopped. Behind the scenes, behind the handcuffs and courtroom etiquette, Bundy was still plotting, still scheming. On June 7, 1977, while awaiting trial in Aspen, Colorado, for the murder of Karen Campbell, Bundy made his first daring escape. During a recess, he asked to visit the law library on the second floor of the Pitkin County Courthouse. Guards agreed. He was left unshackled, alone behind a desk. Bundy opened a window and jumped. He fell more than 25 feet, sprained his ankle, and ran into the mountains. For 6 days, the nation held its breath. Ted Bundy had vanished. Bloodhounds were deployed. Helicopters scanned the hills. Local residents locked their doors. The manhunt was massive. Bundy survived on stolen food, changed his appearance by shaving his head, and stayed hidden in a cabin. But his luck ran out. He was spotted driving a stolen car and arrested again. Back in custody, Bundy's demeanor barely changed. He cracked jokes, feigned innocence, and even gained sympathy from some who saw him as a misunderstood genius. But he was already planning his next move, and this time, he wouldn't fail. On December 30th, 1977, Bundy executed his most audacious escape yet. Now being held at the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, Bundy had been secretly losing weight for months. He dropped over 35 pounds. At night, he would climb into the crawl space above his cell ceiling. Bit by bit, he carved a hole and explored the building's ductwork. When the time was right, on a night when jail staff were distracted by holiday festivities, Bundy squeezed through the ceiling, dropped down into a guard's apartment, changed clothes, and simply walked out the front door. Gone. This time there would be no swift recapture. He stole a car and made his way across several states, eventually winding up in Tallahassee, Florida. For more than a month, Bundy was free, and with that freedom came carnage. On January 15, 1978, just after 3 a.m., Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. What happened next was a nightmare of unrelenting savagery. Armed with a piece of oak firewood, Bundy crept from room to room. He attacked 4 women in under 15 minutes. Margaret Bowman, 21, beaten and strangled. Lisa Levy, 20, bludgeoned, sexually assaulted, bitten. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner both survived, but with horrific injuries. One roommate returned home early and may have unknowingly scared Bundy off before he continued his rampage. Minutes later, he broke into a basement apartment nearby and assaulted another FSU student.
The Tallahassee Police Department was stunned. The brutality, the speed, the randomness. This wasn't the methodical Bundy of before. This was something more frenzied, more unhinged. But he wasn't finished. 3 weeks later, on February 9th, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her junior high school in Lake City, Florida. She was last seen being led away by a man in a van. Her body wouldn't be found for nearly 2 months, discarded near a pig shed in a remote state park. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. It was the most depraved act in a long list of atrocities, and it would be the final one. On February 15, 1978, just days after Kimberly's murder, Bundy was pulled over by Officer David Lee of the Pensacola Police Department. The car had stolen plates, and Bundy gave a false ID. Lee didn't recognize him at first, but something was off. He arrested the man and brought him in for questioning. Within days, fingerprints confirmed it. Ted Bundy was in custody again. This time, there would be no escape. The Florida trials began in 1979. First for the Chi Omega murders, then later for the abduction and murder of Kimberly Leach. Bundy once again represented himself. He smiled at cameras, flirted with reporters, played the part of a wrongfully accused man, doing everything he could to win sympathy. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses placed him near the sorority house that night. A bite mark on Lisa Levy matched Bundy's dental impressions. A hotel clerk identified Bundy as the man who rented a room nearby. Bundy's hair and fibers from the sorority house were found in his car. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Guilty. Then the Leach trial. Bundy was found guilty again, and the sentence? Death. The charismatic predator, who once maneuvered through life with effortless charm, was now shackled to the grim reality of death row. But even there, Bundy wasn't done playing games. For years, he stalled his execution by appealing decisions, changing lawyers, and dangling the prospect of confessions. In interviews, he hinted at more victims, more crimes, more secrets. He craved attention, and America gave it to him. In 1989, just days before his scheduled execution, Bundy began talking. Really talking. He confessed to 30 homicides across 7 states. But even then, many believed he wasn't telling the whole story. Bundy was a master manipulator. He used his confessions like a currency, offering just enough to stay alive, just enough to remain relevant. He gave interviews to psychologists, journalists, and law enforcement. He described his entity, a force inside him that drove him to kill. He blamed pornography, his upbringing, society, anything but himself. One of his final interviews was with FBI agent Bill Hagmaier. Bundy admitted, at last, that he was the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet. It was the closest he came to honesty. And then, time ran out. On January 24, 1989, at 7:16 a.m. Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Crowds gathered outside the prison gates. They held signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." They cheered as news of his death was announced. For many, it was justice. For others, a haunting reminder of how long it had taken. Inside the prison, witnesses to the execution described Bundy as calm. His last words were, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." But no final words could undo what he had done. Ted Bundy had left a trail of devastation that spanned the country. He had shattered families, scarred survivors, and exposed a terrifying truth. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it smiles, it opens doors, it asks for help. Bundy changed the way America thought about serial killers. Before him, the term serial killer barely existed in public discourse. After him, it was everywhere. The FBI would go on to develop criminal profiling techniques in part because of Bundy. He became the prototype for the manipulative, high-functioning predator, the boogeyman in a suit. His legacy is not one of mystery, but of warning. Because Bundy didn't hide in shadows, he walked in daylight. He looked like us. And that, more than anything, is what made him so terrifying. The name Ted Bundy still sends a chill down the spine. But what lingers isn't just the horror of what he did, it's what he represented. A man who smiled at strangers, who blended in, who shook hands with politicians and kissed his girlfriend goodnight. A man who looked like the future, while hiding a hunger for death. Bundy's case didn't just traumatize the nation. It forced it to evolve. By the late 1980s, when he finally met the electric chair, Bundy had become more than a murderer. He had become a mirror, a reflection of society's assumptions, failures, and deepest fears. Law enforcement, for one, was caught unprepared. In the early 1970s, there was no such thing as a centralized criminal database. Police departments operated in silos. A missing girl in Washington was considered entirely separate from a murder in Utah. Detectives didn't share notes. FBI behavioral analysis was in its infancy. Bundy exploited that chaos. He hunted across state lines: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Florida, knowing full well the system wasn't built to track someone like him. No fingerprints were shared. No timelines matched. No one was connecting the dots fast enough. And so the killings continued. It wasn't until the magnitude of his crimes became undeniable that law enforcement realized they needed new tools. Bundy's case directly influenced the formation and evolution of interjurisdictional task forces. Agencies began investing in centralized databases and behavioral profiling. Suddenly, the FBI's behavioral science unit, once a fringe concept, was seen as vital. People often credit the rise of criminal profiling to Bundy's case. Investigators needed to understand how someone like him could exist. Someone who appeared so normal, so promising, and yet committed unspeakable acts. His legacy helped push criminal science forward. But there's a darker, more unsettling legacy too. Bundy shattered a sense of safety for an entire generation of young women. The early 1970s were supposed to be a time of liberation, a time when women could walk alone, choose their own paths, live independently. Bundy used that progress as a weapon. His victims were not naive. They were strong, driven, intelligent women, college students, future nurses, teachers, scientists. Many came from supportive families. They were careful, thoughtful. They just had no reason to suspect the man with the charming smile, the kind voice, the sling on his arm. Bundy exploited kindness. That was his true technique. He didn't use brute force, at least not at first. He used vulnerability. He created situations that compelled people to help him. A dropped folder, a limp, a polite request. And when someone stopped to help, he struck. What makes that so haunting is how relatable it is. How many of us would have done the same? How many would have offered to help someone with a broken arm lift their books? How many would have trusted the man who looked like a graduate student and talked like a future politician? That's what society had to grapple with after Bundy. Evil didn't wear a mask. It wore a smile. The media, too, changed forever because of Bundy. His trial was one of the first to be nationally televised. Millions watched as he played the role of lawyer, cross-examining witnesses in his own murder trial. He combed his hair, adjusted his tie, and grinned at the cameras. He didn't just defend himself, he performed. There was something chilling about watching him operate. He was calculated, persuasive, often charming. People, especially women, wrote him love letters. Some came to court just to see him. He had a strange kind of celebrity status, and that opened a new chapter in how America consumed crime. The true crime genre as we know it today owes much to Bundy's trial. Journalists, authors, filmmakers all began to explore not just what Bundy did, but who he was. What made him tick? How could someone so normal become so monstrous? But not everyone was enchanted by the enigma. For the families of the victims, the media circus was a second form of trauma. They watched as the man who destroyed their daughters' lives became a household name, a source of fascination, a subject of debate. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a brand. That legacy is still debated today. But at the heart of it all were the women. The ones who should have been doctors, scientists, mothers, the ones who never got to live their full stories. Linda Ann Healy was a psychology student who wanted to help people. Donna Manson had dreams of becoming a forest ranger. Susan Rancourt wanted to work with children. Karen Campbell was a nurse who cared for terminal patients. Kimberly Leach was just 12. She hadn't even begun to shape her future. Their names should have been known for their accomplishments. Instead, they became part of Bundy's story, collateral in his reign of terror. And yet, it's their names we must remember, not his. They are the heart of this tragedy. Each victim was a life interrupted, a future erased. Their loss is not just personal, it's societal. Think of the ideas they might have pursued, the lives they might have touched, the children they might have raised, the laughter, the love, the lessons lost. Bundy didn't just kill people. He stole futures, and that theft lingers. Today, the term Bundy type is still used in law enforcement and forensic psychology. He's become the prototype for the intelligent, organized psychopath. The charming killer, the wolf in human skin. Criminologists study his movements, his methods, his interviews. Psychologists dissect his upbringing, raised by a mother who pretended to be his sister, his early obsessions with control and dominance, his possible narcissistic and antisocial disorders. Lawyers study the oddity of his trial, his self-representation, his manipulation of the courtroom, his cat-and-mouse game with judges and prosecutors. Sociologists explore the cultural response, how Bundy became a character, a myth, a warning. Even in death, his influence hasn't waned. On January 24, 1989, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed at Florida State Prison. He had spent over a decade on death row, giving interviews, offering partial confessions, drawing out his story. Outside the prison that morning, a crowd gathered. Some were reporters, others were victims' families. Many were locals who held signs reading "Burn Bundy Burn." They cheered when the switch was flicked. Fireworks exploded in the sky. It was a grim celebration, but a celebration nonetheless. To them, justice had finally been served. But no punishment could undo what Bundy had done. No electric chair could bring back the missing women. No execution could erase the fear he instilled, the innocence he shattered, the trust he exploited. What it did provide was an ending, an exclamation mark on a decade of horror, and perhaps a small measure of peace. In the years since his death, Bundy's legacy has remained a subject of study, debate, and caution. His story appears in textbooks, documentaries, films, podcasts, and criminal justice courses. His crimes are analyzed, not just for their brutality, but for what they teach us about vulnerability, deception, and the masks people wear. He is the reason many women now carry keys between their knuckles when walking alone. The reason we teach our children about stranger danger. The reason law enforcement takes missing persons cases more seriously. Ted Bundy didn't invent evil, but he made us recognize it in places we hadn't looked before, and that recognition reshaped the world. So we remember the victims, we study the predator, and we vow to see through the smiles, the charm, the nice suits. Because if Bundy taught us anything, it's that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look just like the boy next door.